Mr. Bender, how can MENA oil exporting economies at this point support economic diversification and enhance the private sector efforts, which a lot is, being focused on?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Noor, and many thanks to the IMF team for organizing and hosting this important event. I'd like also to thank Jihad for his informative presentation, and I'm pleased to join this teamed panel. Well, to answer your question, I believe one of the best ways to support diversification is by investing and mobilizing international and domestic investments in the fastest growing sectors that contribute to the economic diversification agenda in our region. And of course, this would require a lot of enablers, but first and foremost, stable and predictable fiscal and monetary policies, coupled with wide-ranging structural reforms that ignite sustainable and inclusive growth. And I believe the progress made in this area in the kingdom is impressive, as rightly mentioned by His Excellency, including strong non-oil activities, relatively low inflation, which is among the lowest within G20 economies, and a marked increase in the number of SMEs, which have more than doubled since the introduction of Vision 2030. And of course, this couldn't be achieved without the continued expansion of investment, coupled with the counter-cyclical policies that have been implemented to enhance resilience and promote private sector-led growth. And that leads me to the second point I'd like to highlight here, because economic reforms should place a strong emphasis on private sector development. And you highlighted this point, Jihad, in your presentation. And it's already happening in the kingdom, as reflected in the surge of private sector activities in terms of investment value and deal count. For example, in the past 2 years, and for the first time, the kingdom ranked first in the MENA region in terms of venture capital funding, and the number of deals last year reached a record high. So that shows how the market has deepened and developed over recent years. But despite this remarkable growth for an economy of Saudi Arabia's size, we believe this is only the beginning, especially given the progress made under the economic transformation and the strong domestic demand. And so the private capital market has huge potential to drive growth in the future, as it remains rich with untapped opportunities that can be leveraged through partnerships, especially between the public and private sectors. And just to give you an example here, the privatization programs and initiatives launched by the government in various sectors, including education, healthcare, utilities, and transport, have created new opportunities for private investment and ultimately increased the role of private capital in the economy. And so we expect that the private sector's share of the Saudi economy will continue to grow in light of the favorable macroeconomic environment.
So what factors and reforms, Mr. Bandr, are needed and should be implemented to enhance the private sector participation in order to foster sustainability and resilience amid all of this volatility, as we have just described it?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, because I believe the growth-friendly reforms and policies that are being implemented in the kingdom have created the needed building blocks for a conducive business environment and thriving private capital ecosystem. And these include, first, an enhanced regulatory framework and streamlined business registration that removes all red tape. And we are seeing this reflected in the surge of FDI inflows. And just to give you an example here, last year, international investors provided more than 50% of venture capital funding in the kingdom. And that was unprecedented, and it shows the strong investor confidence in the Saudi economy. And I believe a lot has contributed to this, including the introduction of new residency programs to attract highly skilled individuals and investors to the local market. Second, the availability of growth capital, for example, through sovereign wealth funds, contributes to long-term economic stability and growth, while helping governments save a portion of resources for future generations. And this is already happening in the kingdom with support from PIF, NDF, among other publicly supported funds and initiatives. And on the same note, investment in new asset classes, such as private credit, which remains significantly untapped in our region and has a huge potential to drive economic growth in the future, as it will help diversify the sources of funding and complement the banking system in financing high-impact projects in priority sectors. Also, investment in education, talent development, and capacity building, a point that Jihad highlighted earlier, cannot be overlooked. And as you know, the kingdom is heavily investing in this area and is progressing well in its labor market reforms, with unemployment declining to a record low, coupled with the fact that the number of women in the workforce has doubled since 2017. Finally, and very importantly on this point, is the digital infrastructure development, with the kingdom now ranked first in the world in terms of e-government services and AI strategy. In fact, Saudi Arabia is very well positioned to be a global hub for AI, which requires large data centers that can be built here, as the kingdom has ample energy, massive land, good connectivity, and more importantly, leadership support. And so it's not surprising to see companies like NVIDIA partnering with Human, a PIF-backed company, to build in Saudi Arabia one of the largest data centers in the world. And so for all those reasons, we are bullish about the trajectory of the investment landscape in our region and in the kingdom in particular.
Speaking of the private sector, you touched upon, Mr. Bandr, the role of technology and AI currently. So what can the private sector do at this point to enhance and to foster the adoption of all of those technologies in order to promote the growth of this lucrative source of growth at this point?
Sure. Well, AI is transforming all industries, and technology overall can accelerate economic development while promoting inclusiveness. But what I believe is very relevant to our region is that with the democratization of technology, the potential now is huge for a more interconnected, inclusive, and dynamic private markets with increased deal flow. And this is because of the lower barriers to entry, more accessibility to data, and the decentralization of innovation hubs. Since innovation now could occur in unexpected place in the world, not necessarily in Silicon Valley or the other traditional tech hubs. And so we believe this will pave the way for a deeper and more efficient private market in our region and in the kingdom in particular, especially since we have the right infrastructure and the other building blocks that are needed for a resilient market. But beyond that, let me illustrate two approaches through which technology can contribute to economic development. First, through the localization of technology, which is critically important to promote innovation and productivity. And here we are seeing a wave of international tech companies moving to our region, including Microsoft, Amazon, Alibaba Cloud, among others. But if I may take Alibaba Cloud as an example, which moved to the kingdom through a joint venture that is one of Jada's portfolio companies. And this move resulted in knowledge and technology transfer instead of importing technology from abroad. Now, the second approach is through exporting technology, which will ultimately increase countries' competitiveness on a global stage. And a clear illustration of this is ACES, which is a Saudi-based company that we invested in through one of our fund managers. They developed the digital infrastructure for the Riyadh metro, among other critical projects in the kingdom, but also expanded internationally to India and Southeast Asia. And they developed the 5G service in Bangalore airport. So this is, of course, one of the ways to broaden the kingdom's export base. And we understand this is a long journey, but we are realizing the benefits of government's focus on technology in the kingdom.